Once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Earlier this week, we saw a horrific attack on a Chaldean Catholic church in Baghdad, as well as a mail bomb plot that originated in Yemen. These events seem to signal an increase in terrorism that is religiously targeted. My next guest is an expert on global jihad and Middle Eastern affairs. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and author of the soon-to-be-released The Coming Revolution: Struggle for Freedom in the Middle East. Would you welcome Dr. Walid Phares back to the program?
Thank you
so much for being back.
Thank you.
Let's talk about this explosion, this terrible hostage situation and the carnage that happened in this Chaldean cathedral. 58 killed, 2 priests among them, 75 wounded. You had these suicide bombers blowing themselves up. Is this meant to drive the Christian population here away, to spook them and send them scattering?
Absolutely, and actually Al-Qaeda in Iraq and the jihadist movement worldwide and in the region is not shy about that. They are basically calling for the withdrawal, for the ethnic cleansing of the Christian population of Iraq, which is among the oldest Christian populations in the Middle East.
But Dr. Phares, why are they bothering about this tiny population? I mean, their population is now cut in half from what it was before the whole Iraqi war. Mm-hmm. Why are they concerned about this fledgling community that for decades and centuries have peacefully coexisted with them?
Because the presence of multiple religious groups create what? Pluralism. It creates democracy. It creates diversity. They are against diversity. What they want to establish is a Taliban-like model in Iraq, in Egypt, in Jordan, in Saudi Arabia. And what did the Taliban do? They suppressed every single other religious group in addition to Muslim moderates. So it's not just anti-Christian, it's anti-freedom in general terms. And the jihadists in Al-Qaeda in Iraq have been systematic. This is not the first event. This is the worst event so far. But they have been targeting the Christians for a while.
We've spoken about this before, and I think it's important to define. We're not talking about Islam. We're talking about political Islam. Explain that to people, because it's very hard to distinguish, I think, particularly for a Western audience watching in Europe or in the United States.
Well, it's very simple, although it is complex. You have Islam as a religion, and you could do debates, theological debate, as we do in the Catholic Church, among Christians, interfaith. Then you have the Muslim community worldwide, and then you have a group which is about 5 to 7% of the entire Muslim world, which basically calls itself Islamist. That's a political movement. And those who are violent among them call themselves jihadists. That's why we call them the jihadi terrorists.
Now, do you buy their explanation? They're saying the entire reasoning for invading this church and causing and threatening havoc on all Christian centers, organizations, institutions, followers, and legitimate targets of the Mujahideen, wherever they can reach them. And they say here that, they refer to the Pope, the hallucinating tyrant of the Vatican knows that the killing sword will not be lifted from the necks of their followers until they declare their innocence from what the dog of the Egyptian church is doing. Now, let's put grammar aside, because there's some problems there. But they're saying, and they're using as a justification, 2 women that they claim converted to Islam who are being held hostage in an Egyptian monastery. What do you make of this?
You know, Raymond, over the past 30 seconds, everything you said, quoting them, seems coming from medieval ages.
Yeah,
right?
It's
the satanic thing and the head of the church, and we're going to go against the Christians of Egypt. This is something that does not belong to the 21st century, does not belong to freedom and pluralism and the very basic rights of human rights around the world. The jihadists who did violence in Iraq are the same who in Egypt have been kidnapping females for the last 20, 30 years, have been persecuting the Copts. The Copts in Egypt are the largest Christian community in the Middle East. 15 million. That's 4 times the size of the entire Palestinian or Israeli population combined. There are more Christians in Cairo, 1 million, than the entire population of Gaza.
And it is a persecuted population. I mean, I remember visiting there almost 20 years ago now, and my translator was a young 18-year-old girl, Catholic girl, a Copt, and she had a little cross on her neck, and I noticed every time she went out, she would put it inside her blouse and button it up. And I said, why do you do that? She said, I don't want to be beat up by the boys. because friends of hers had bruises all over, and the nuns were beaten up, and I mean, it was terrible. They would physically abuse these women, if not rape them with the intent of then, they thought, destroying their religiosity.
Well, look, if you go on websites of the Copts, and there are many, and also the Christians of Iraq, the entire Middle East Christians, you will see persecution clearly. You will see the pictures, you will see the documentation. You will understand that for the last 20, 30, maybe 40 years, there have been a systematic persecution of the 18 to 25 million people living in the Middle East between Armenia and Sudan. So this is a very pressing issue for our government, and now this Congress, and the entire United Nations to go after, to address.
We're joined by Bishop Sarhad Yamo. He is of the eparchy of St. Peter the Apostle. Now, he's in San Diego, but he is a Chaldean, and these are his brothers and sisters, and our brothers and sisters. The Chaldean faith is part of the Eastern Catholic faith. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak about a really dramatic, tragic, very urgent, very alarming situation in the whole Middle East, but especially in Iraq. Now, Iraq is the stage, the scene where barbarism, where ferocity, where of really dark forces is exercised in front of the eyes of the whole world. And how can the American army be there? This is 7, 8 years is there. And this is happening in front of our eyes in plain day. So this is very alarming. And I call on every person, man of goodwill. This is not something that could be tolerated in our time and world. So something must be done. And amazingly, even an inquiry, an investigation.
Yeah, that hasn't happened yet.
Is not even somehow activated under the auspices of international institutions, and especially endorsed by our country here, United States. Let us start with an inquiry. I mean, how can this happen without even having an inquiry internationally verified to reach to the bottom of the truth? Who is behind it?
Bishop Yamo.
Why the government is not, the Iraqi government is not doing anything about it? Why United States, our country is there, is on the ground?
Bishop Yamo, before we run out of time, I just want to ask you this. Considering the discrimination that the Chaldeans are facing on the ground and the tolerance of the Iraqi security forces for this kind of extremist violence, what are your hopes for the people of the Chaldean faith there, and do you think they can remain, or will it be scattered throughout this diaspora?
Really, how long can anyone absorb this kind of atrocity? How long? I mean, we were there, Chaldeans in Iraq, were there for thousands of years now, persecuted. I mean, Timor-Lang, Hulago, the Turkish Ottoman even genocide that happened, and until now they survived. Christians of Iraq, mostly Chaldeans, they survived. Chaldeans are 99% Catholic. They survived. Can you imagine that now? Yeah. They cannot survive, and sure, if that is their fate, if the world is just watching, then at least do something for them to go somewhere safely.
Yeah, fine, give them a safe harbor, yeah. Bishop Jamal, thanks so much for joining us, and we certainly will not stop reporting this story. We've been covering this for a long time, and we'll keep up with you. Dr. Phares, in previous appearances on the show, it was suggested by Nina Shea and others that there could be a land set aside so that the Christians could at least find safe harbor and protection now. That has not been forthcoming. What is the answer here?
See, the bishop has a great point with regard to our U.S. foreign policy. How is it possible that in the 90s we went to Yugoslavia twice, to Kosovo and to Bosnia
To stop ethnic cleansing.
to save and protect Muslim population. And we did the right thing. And now we have been in Iraq for the last many years. We are on the ground, and we see in front of us Christians being massacred and ethnic cleansed, knowing that many of those families have relatives in large communities here in America. They're cousins to Americans. 120,000 citizens of Chicago are Chaldean and Assyrians, same goes for Detroit. Now the point is, yes, we should help the Chaldean Assyrian Christian community in Iraq to form their own autonomous area. That's the federation. That's the principle of the Iraqi constitution. Why don't we apply it for them as we applied it for the Kurds, for example?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. It's like we have a don't ask, don't tell policy toward terrorists in foreign policy speaking from the United States. It makes no sense. Let's move on to this Yemen bomber. These were packages sent intended for two Chicago synagogues. I guess the addresses were old and it wouldn't have gotten there anyway. But nonetheless, that was the intention. What do you make of this? And again, we see a religious target at the other end of this bomb.
Absolutely. Look, what we have in Yemen today are two things. The infantry of Al-Qaeda, people with AK-47s, people who are fighting the government there. But then you have something new that we need to pay attention to. The techies, people who are technologically savvy. Two of them, at least their leader, are American citizen. Imam al-Awlaki, they know exactly our system. They know how we are affected. They look at the weak spots, and the weak spot was to what? UPS us or FedEx us couple bombs. They're looking always for the ways to get those explosives into our homeland, and that is happening not out of context. Even on the homeland, on the inside, we see a rise in the jihadi activity. So it's all coming together to try to hurt our national security and hurt our national economy.
Well, we also see this Farouk Ahmed in Ashburn, Virginia. This is just a stone's throw from D.C., a suburb of Washington, D.C., and the FBI arrested this man. Why is it so troubling?
Because he is amongst us, and because he is one of us.
A naturalized citizen.
He's a naturalized citizen, and this is happening in our neighborhood. This is not somebody thrown by the Taliban into a high-profile place in New York, as was the case with the Times Square bomb, or some shoe bomber. This is someone who's living in our neighborhoods.
And what was he doing?
And he was trying to look at targets, including trains, metro stations, other potential targets. And my concern is not that, he only. How many other jihadists like this guy are among us? How many other people have been indoctrinated and incited and are now living among us? That's the very dangerous situation.
What can we do? Where has the government dropped the ball regarding this kind of homegrown terrorism and being watchful of
I could give you a very long list, but there is something that has happened over the past 2 years of the previous administration and certainly the past 2 years of this administration, which is that there was a ban put by this administration on the use of words and terms and ideological concepts that would allow the analysts in defense and in homeland security and in national security to understand where is radicalization. They say, oh, don't use the term jihad. Don't use Islamization. Don't use the caliphate, the Salafis. These are the exact words we need to use so that we can detect radicalization. And we are like blind. We are like finding a war without radar if we can't use these concepts.